Hello and welcome to Moneylife News and Views. I'm Debashis Basu. On August 15th, India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, used his Independence Day address to announce a sweeping simplification of the country's goods and services tax. The patchwork of four main rates, 5, 12, 18, and 28%, will be collapsed into two, 5% and 18%. A punitive 40% levy will remain for sin goods such as tobacco and alcohol. The aim, said the government, is to ease compliance, reduce distortions, and put more money in consumers' hands. To investors and economists, the announcement sounded eerily familiar. 6 years earlier, on September 20th, 2019, the finance minister stunned India Inc. by slashing corporate taxes from 30% to 22%, and for new companies, from 25% to 15%. For firms such as Hindustan Lever, Asian Paints, Nestle, Bajaj Finance, HDFC Bank were all flush with profits and therefore have to pay high taxes. The cuts meant a windfall. The BSE Sensex soared 5.3% in a single day and 2.8% the following Monday, its biggest two-day rally in years. Yet the enthusiasm faded because the tax cuts were just a knee-jerk reaction, a desperate response to a flagging economy. Growth had slowed down to 5% in the first quarter of that year, 3.5% as per old calculations, which is one of the lowest rates in decades together. Exports were languishing, employment rising, and auto sales had sunk to a two-decade low. The financial system was in crisis, with shadow banks teetering. The tax bonanza was supposed to spur companies to reinvest the savings, leading to employment. But higher retained earnings don't drive expansion plans of cash-rich companies. The only things that make them spend their money on expanding their capacities is strong demand. And strong demand was nowhere to be seen. Even now, the problem with India is weak demand. No wonder the generous tax cuts did not translate into corporate expansion. We are still waiting for private capital expenditure upcycle, which brokerage reports have been talking about, have been hoping, touting for the past 15 years before that. Instead, 6 years later, we are getting another sharp tax cut. The economic setting in 2025 is less catastrophic but hardly robust. India Inc.'s core earnings shrank 3.3% year on year in April-June quarter, the second contraction in 4 quarters. Revenue grew 7.3%, but excluding financial services and oil companies, growth was just 5.3%, not even enough to cover inflation. Profit before tax fell 7.4%. The earnings of 3,051 listed firms shrank. India's core sector output grew just 2% year on year in July, down from 2.2% in June. Industrial output dropped to a 10-month low of 1.5% in June. Slippages at Indian banks rose 26%, driven by stress in microfinance and unsecured retail portfolios. Fresh slippages reached 49,000 crore. Recoveries and upgrades fell 3.4%, while write-offs declined marginally. Gross non-performing assets rose 6.7% to 4.8 lakh crore. The data suggests early signs of credit fatigue, if not outright worry. Foreign portfolio investors have been noticing all this for a long time, and as I've mentioned many times, they have a much more clear-headed view. Their views are not cluttered or clouded by fake nationalism. They're spooked by this sluggish earnings and a sliding rupee. They sold Indian equities worth 21,000 crore in the first half of August alone, bringing outflows to 1,16,000 crore in 2025. Foreign institutional investors sharply reduced their exposure to Indian equities in July, making India the most underweight market among emerging market portfolios. India's relative weight fell 2.9 percentage points versus the MSCI Emerging Markets Index. Meanwhile, China, Hong Kong, and South Korea all got increased allocations. Can GST 2.0 reverse this fundamental problem? Cutting consumption tax for masses is different from cutting income tax for rich companies. It definitely is much more beneficial. The State Bank of India reckons that rationalization of the GST could lift annual consumption by nearly 2 lakh crore, or about 8% of household demand. In an economy where consumption contributes nearly 60% of GDP, the hope is that higher household spending will ripple through manufacturing and services, spurring growth. But the immediate trigger is geopolitical. In a sharp escalation of tensions, Washington has branded India a prime enabler of Russian war effort, however ludicrous that sounds, thanks to its purchases of cheap Russian oil. On 27th August, America will impose a 50% tariff on around 50 billion of Indian exports, more than half of its 80 billion of annual shipments to the United States. Few importers will absorb such a price hike unless exporters find other buyers or some last minute deal is struck. A large chunk of sales will just vanish overnight, leading to job losses. This is where low consumption tax makes sense. Domestic consumption, courtesy of GST 2.0, is intended as a buffer. However, the mercurial US president can escalate his war by targeting Indian software exports, H-1B visa, and foreign remittances, which are critical to India's balance of payments and currency stability, which we now take for granted. But until that happens, the GST 2.0 will help. The trouble is that such tactical cuts do little to address India's deeper weaknesses, which will continue. In 2019, if tax policy had been part of a coherent growth strategy, it would have been built into the budget, not unveiled as a bolt from the blue in the middle of the year. The same is true today. A one-off reduction in consumption tax may cushion consumers against tariff shocks, but it does nothing to repair the structural impediments to growth. And I am not even sure if Indian companies are going to take full advantage of it or they are going to be imports of consumer goods. After all, Alibaba's AliExpress has been allowed to function from India. So are we going to buy Indian goods with the lower tax and the lower prices, or are we going to buy goods from China? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. India's persistent failure to capture global markets share is illustrated. Consider textiles, one of our top 10 exports. In 2010, China controlled 36.6% of world exports. By 2018, as wages rose, its share had slipped to 31.3%. Who grabbed this share of China when it was up for grabs? Vietnam and Bangladesh. They seized the opening, doubling their shares to 6.2 and 6.4%. India's share fell slightly from 3.3 to 3.2. Taxes were not the issue. Rather, it was a frictional cost of doing business in India, red tape, corruption, poor logistics, and inconsistent policies that held firms back. Indian companies just cannot scale. They find it very hard to navigate all the licenses and corruptions which range from panchayat right up, and so they are all small and fragmented units with poor economies of scale. They can't compete with Vietnam, forget about China. The corporate tax cut of 2019 was meant to signal a pro growth turn. Instead, it ended up as an improvised fix. GST 2.0 risks being another. There is one difference, though, between the two situations. The 2009 tax cut fueled an explosion of speculation, tremendous amount of hope among business leaders, bankers, and everybody else about further big bang reforms. After all, this was a clear signal from a reformist PM about to make major changes at last, as everybody was expecting. No one is expecting any of those big bang reforms anymore. If you liked it, please do share and do subscribe. Thanks for watching.